gross, but as you
Hello, good morning. My name is Courtney, and I'm here today coming to you from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. You are joining us for our Aquarium Online Academy. I also have my friend Jen here, and she's going to be moving us around all around our aquarium today. Here you're seeing our blue cavern exhibit. So today we're going to be talking about something really cool. We're going to be talking about food webs. If you have something you want to ask us, if you have something you want to tell us, or an observation you've made, please do. You might notice this number at the bottom of our screen. So you can text questions into us at 562 286 1838. Text rates may apply. If you are a kiddo, ask a grown up you're with. If you are watching this later on, or you just prefer to contact us later after this, you can also email us. So to email us, that email address is live@lbaop.org. All right. And the more you get involved, the more we're able to tailor this program to you. So we really love to hear from you. Anyways, like I said, we're going to be talking about food webs. So a food web, you might have heard of that, or you might have heard of a food chain. So basically, it's just who eats what or who gets energy from where. So we're going to start off looking at a food web that we have near us here in Southern California. I'm going to step to the side so you can see this amazing exhibit. This is a kelp forest habitat. And like I said, this is a kind of habitat we have around here in Southern California. This particular exhibit is based off of just off of Catalina. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to start with practicing a skill we're going to use throughout the whole program, and that is making observations. So I would love it if you took a few minutes to just see what you notice about this habitat. So you can see what kind of animals you notice, what non-living things are in the exhibit, what kind of colors you see in the exhibit, the sizes or shapes of the things you see in the exhibit, whether they're animals or not. So just see what you can notice. So one thing you may have noticed was all of this stuff. So this is that kelp. You might also call it seaweed. So I mentioned this is a kelp forest. So basically a kelp forest is a place in our ocean where you have a bunch of kelp growing around, and it's growing so close that it creates an underwater forest. So this kelp is really important. It provides a home for all the animals in the kelp forest. They are adapted to live there, where that means that the special things they have in their body or instincts they have that help them survive are specialized for living in a kelp forest. So if they were to leave the kelp forest, or if the kelp forest were to change in a big way, they wouldn't be able to survive as well. So that just shows you how important this kelp is to the animals of the kelp forest. Excellent. And Jen put that word up there, adaptation. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. Adaptation's just, again, anything an animal has. It could be a body part or an instinct, but it's something they have that helps them survive. So let's go back to our blue cavern. See what else we notice. Oh my gosh, it's left us. You might have noticed there's this big line here a little bit ago. That was from one of our stingrays. So they are a member of our kelp forest. You might also see all these different fish. Ooh, we have one coming up to us now, really close. So these cameras we have here, they're running almost 24/7. Sometimes they're down for a little bit. But if you ever want to see what our fish are up to, you can always check our website. And some, like this fish, are a little more interested in the limelight than others. You may also notice that we have some rocks here in our kelp forest. So those rocks are really important. They help give the kelp something to anchor onto. We can see it, I think, right here. So that kelp anchors onto the rock so it can grow from the bottom of the kelp forest all the way to the top and throughout the kelp forest. They offer different kinds of homes and different advantages for the fish that live in the kelp forest. And now I would also like to turn your attention to some of our fish. So, ooh, we see a sheep head there. That's that striped one that's swimming across the screen. What I'd like you to try to notice, what do you notice about the fish as far as differences in size? Are they all the same size? Are they different sizes? Yeah, you might notice we have lots of different sizes. We have some big ones. Our sheep head's not too small. You might have seen a really big one somewhere in the background. That's our giant sea bass. Some of the biggest animals we have here at the aquarium. And you might see some small ones. So because we have big fish and little fish, that is part of why we're able to have a whole food web that is interconnected. We're able to have animals that can eat some others, and then in those little animals, they eat other animals as well. So what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to start by drawing a kelp forest. We'll fill it in with some of those things that we talked about, and then we'll add some new animals. And I think that's our sheep head that's really close to us. Yes, I definitely want to make sure we get that sheep head in our kelp forest food web. All right. So I'm going to go over to my document camera. Excellent. So let's see. The first thing I'm going to add to my kelp forest is some water. Everyone in the habitat is going to need that. Excellent. And then, let me see, I will add some rocks. We had some big rocks in our kelp forest. I'll add a few of those. We also had some tiny rocks, almost like little pebbles. Perfect. Then I'm going to add that kelp. So like I said, we have kelp. It starts by, it is attached to the rocks, and it has kind of a big pile of what looks like roots. It's called a holdfast. Unlike a root on a plant we might have on land, this holdfast really all it does is, like I said earlier, anchors the kelp down to the rock so it can stay in one place. It's not being pushed by the waves all over. And then kelp grows very fast. It grows a lot, and so eventually it's going to hit the surface of the water, and it'll keep growing, and then you'll have a bunch of kelp just floating along the surface. I'll add some of these. These are what we call blades. They look a lot like leaves. One big difference between this and a plant is these blades, this is actually where they get their nutrients. Our plants on land would get their nutrients from the roots in the ground. But as I said earlier, they don't have roots like that. So that is what they use these blades for. I'm going to add another kelp. We'll just do 2, but in a real kelp forest, there would be tons and tons of these. So a nice, healthy kelp forest would have a lot of these. All right. So I've mentioned a little bit some differences between this kelp and plants that we have on land. And the reason being is because this is actually not a plant at all. It is algae. So what's the difference between algae and plants? Well, if we're talking on a really teeny tiny level, algae can be single cellular. Plants are always going to be multicellular. So if you see those teeny tiny little dots of green in the water, that is some of that really tiny algae. Obviously, this algae here, this kelp, has more than that. They have a few cells actually. But basically, do the same kinds of things as plants, but they do it in a different way. Similar to how they have something that looks like roots but does a different job. Those blades, like we said, they look like leaves, but again, they do a different job. But going back to the idea of them doing similar things, they get their energy from the same place plants on land do. So where could that be? Where do we think our plants get their energy from? So, you may or may not have heard this before, but our plants on land and algae, they do what's called photosynthesis. So basically, they are able to get energy not from another living thing, eating it like we would, but from just getting energy from the sun. So, I'm actually going to add the sun to my food web. I know it seems strange to add something to a food web when it's not food at all. But when we are talking, oh, can you see my little sun there? Let me see. Anyways, like I said, when we're talking about food webs, we're talking about basically how energy moves around in a habitat. And so this is going to be where it all starts. So the sun is going to give energy to our kelp. So we talked a little bit about the importance of kelp and the way that it provides a home. What else do you think kelp could do for our animals that live in the kelp forest? Well, again, think about plants. Let's say animals that live in a forest. There are a lot of animals that live in those trees, but a lot of them might get something else from the trees or the grass in that forest. They might eat it, right? Well, the same thing is true for our kelp. There are a lot of animals that like to eat it. I'm going to add one that I can think of off the top of my head. I'll use a nice pink color for this. Urchins are big kelp eaters. So I drew a little urchin right there. I'll draw another urchin as well. I wonder, Jen, can we take a look at an urchin? So this is an urchin right here, and as you can see, it is sitting on a little blade of kelp. Actually, I didn't mention it earlier, but I love that we can see the little grooves. We talked about how those blades are what grab nutrients from the water. Well, they have all these little grooves because that gives them lots of surface area to grab those nutrients. Kind of like how our brain has lots of wrinkles to give us surface area. Um, Anyways, these urchins, they're invertebrates and they love to eat kelp. There's a few other animals that eat algae in our kelp forest. So they're a big important part because those algae eaters, they actually make room for new kelp to grow, and they make sure we're not having just one kind of algae in our habitat. Something that's really important in every habitat is having lots of biodiversity. So biodiversity, what does that mean? Well, bio as living. So it is the living thing, and then diversity as in just having lots of differences, different things. So if we have a lot of biodiversity, we have lots of different living things. And we want to see that in having lots of different animals and lots of different algae or plant life or whatever you're looking at in that habitat. So in fact, I actually remind myself of another awesome algae eater that lives in the kelp forest. I'm going to go ahead and draw it. Yeah, Jen guessed it. It is an abalone. So, ooh, we're going to look at an abalone in just a sec. So it has this shell. And then I'm going to draw some dots on it. It is a snail. It might look a little different from the snails we see on land. You see it has that shell and it has a soft body right there. I'll draw one more. All right, let's take a look at a real abalone. Excellent. So, like I said, these animals also eat a lot of algae. So, our urchins, they'll tend to eat the kelp itself that grows from those holdfasts on the rocks. A lot of abalone will kind of eat the algae that is growing on rocks. So again, by having animals that eat kelp, it makes sure that there's no, or eat kelp and the different kinds of algae in the habitat. It makes sure we're not seeing just one kind of algae take over. So that's a really big important part of food webs and how they relate to biodiversity. So you know what? I'm gonna go back to my drawing. I'm gonna give our abalone some nice algae to eat. And like we did with the sun, let's go ahead and add some more arrows. And you might notice I am having it so the arrow is going from the thing that's being eaten to the thing that's doing the eating. Again, that is just to reflect that we are showing how energy is moving from the algae to the urchin and the snail, the abalone. Excellent. So let's think about some animals that might want to eat these critters. We saw one of them a little bit earlier. Got way up close to us. So this is our sheephead. I'm drawing it with the middle missing because its middle is pink. And they like to eat urchins. Another animal that loves to eat urchins, let me see, is a fellow invertebrate. Sea stars eat urchins. So both of these animals eat urchins. Oh, we see a sheep right there. Perfect. This is a really cool, unique animal. We talked about biodiversity. Having lots of diversity in a species is really important, and we can see those sharp sheephead teeth that can help it crunch the shell of that urchin. Something that's also important in a species specifically is having genetic diversity or diversity in the gender of the animals in a population. So one thing a sheephead can do is if there are not enough males, one of them can change their gender so they're able to produce more sheepheads, which is great. We love to see sheepheads in a kelp forest habitat. Excellent. So I mentioned the sheephead and the sea stars, animals that will eat urchins. Now, even though they both eat urchins, they are not the number one urchin eater. There is another animal that has that title. We're going to talk a little bit about how much it eats and why it eats so much and why that is important. So I wonder if Jen can show me our number one champion urchin eater. There it is. Perfect. That is our otter. So otters are incredibly important to kelp forest habitats. They are a keystone species, and that just means that even one otter makes a huge difference in the health of a kelp forest habitat, makes the kelp forest way healthier. And a lot of that has to do with, like I said, how much they eat and how much they eat urchins specifically. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little otter to my kelp forest. Let me see. I have a brown color somewhere. There we go. Oh. Perfect. Ooh. So I'm going to add this otter, and then we're going to take a little look at its mouth. So otters, they love eating all kinds of shellfish. Like I said, talking about the kelp forest and the health of it is really important. The relationship between urchins and otters. I'm going to add that arrow there, and I'm also going to give him a little number one. Like I said, he is our champion urchin eater. Excellent. So let's take a look at an otter eating, or its mouth at least. Okay. So we're going to, ooh, these are some of our otters here at the aquarium. We can see their teeth. So just like we talked about with the sheephead, it had those sharp teeth to help it eat and get through that urchin's shell or its test. These otters have really sharp, strong teeth as well. So take a look. Do we see any differences between its teeth? Are they all the same? Yeah, you might notice it has some sharp teeth near the front and some smaller but still pretty sharp teeth in the very front, and then it gets a little flat in the back. Is that similar to any other animal's teeth that you've seen? If you have a dog or a cat, it's a little similar to that. We have some sharp teeth in the corners of our mouths too. Not quite as sharp as that, but it's not dissimilar to ours. So otters, they are mammals just like us and very similar to us. Their teeth are also made to have a few different jobs. So otters, they have these sharp teeth that can help with like scraping meat off of shells. Ooh, perfect. They also have some flat teeth in the back. Some of that shellfish they eat is a little chewy. If you've ever tried to eat like, let's say like a raw scalp, that's something an otter would love to eat. That can be a little chewy, so they have some flat teeth to help out with that. And we can see here this guy is getting some shrimp. Now, you might be wondering, okay, it has strong teeth that can break through a test, but the urchin's kind of spiky, and there's a lot of other shellfish that's really spiky too, like are really hard on the outside. Crabs, those scallops you mentioned. An otter might even really like to eat those abalone we drew. So how is it going to get to all that? Well, otters are really, really unique animals. They use tools, not unlike us. So they will grab a rock or another hard shell, and they might use that to break open the shell of some kind of animal they're eating. And if they really like it, have a little pouch right around here near their armpit where they can put it. It's a little pocket, and they can keep that rock or that shell with them, and they can use that to open up all that shellfish that it loves to eat. But I said we were talking about why it eats so much urchin, or it eats urchins, also just food in general. So otters, they are a mammal like us. We mentioned that. And so like us, they are warm-blooded. Their body can keep them warm, but their home can be really cold. You know, they live in our waters here in Southern California. Our waters tend to be a little chilly. And they're the only ocean mammal that doesn't have blubber. So they have to have some other ways to stay warm. Can you think of one way they have to stay warm? Yeah, you might notice that fur. So they have really thick fur. They have some of the thickest fur in the world in just like this much space that I have my fingers right there. There'd be like a million hairs there. So their fur is a great asset. That's a great adaptation. They also, in addition to that, eat. So otters, and this is the same for us too, when they eat, their body has a great energy to digest their food. So basically what they do is they take advantage of that, and they just are constantly eating throughout the day. So their body will always create energy, and that energy will give them warmth. So basically their tummies are like little furnaces. So they eat about a fourth of their weight every day. So that is a lot of eating, and that is why, to go back to our kelp forest, that is why they are the #1 urchin eater. So think about these two. Are they going to eat as much as our otter? So first of all, they're not quite as big. They don't need as much energy to fuel their body. They also don't really move as much as the otter. The otter is always diving down to find its food and then diving back up to eat, spending a lot more energy. Think of that compared to our sea star, for example. Do you think sea stars move a lot? No, they're pretty stationary. So even though they can eat urchins, they're not going to do it as much as the otter does. So this is a good example of the kind of food web we would see in a kelp forest. And honestly, we could go on and on. There's so many more animals we could add to this. But I wanted to give you a scenario. So we have all this going on, and we talked about how this otter here is a keystone species. So what do you think would happen if this cute little otter just disappeared? We didn't have an otter anymore. What do we think might happen to this food web? Well, we wouldn't have our champion urchin eater. We'd have the sea star and the sheephead to eat it. But we already talked about they don't eat quite as much. The bulk of the work is done by the otters, but that guy's gone now. So what we might see happen is we might get way more urchins. And, you know, urchins, they are pretty straightforward animals. They just eat their food. You know, they don't think about sustainability. A lot of humans don't think about sustainability, so the urchins definitely aren't thinking that far ahead. So what would happen to the urchins is next they're going to start eating that kelp. And eventually we're going to see our kelp start to disappear. And I think Jen might have a video of what that would look like. Oh, perfect. So this is a kelp forest that lost its otters a long time ago, and then because of that, these urchins were not kept in check. Their population just exploded, and then they ate all of their kelp. So what differences do we notice? We see a lot of urchins. We see a lack of kelp. Oh, yeah, as I point out, we also, it's not just the kelp that's gone, it is all the fish. So we talked about how the kelp is home for the fish. It is also a source of food for them. So The way I like to think about this is thinking about kelp the same way we think about our infrastructure. So imagine where you live. What would happen to you if all the buildings in your city or town just disappeared? If all the roads just disappeared? Would your life be the same? Or would it be a lot harder? It would get a lot harder, and that is very similar to what it's like for the animals that lived in the kelp forest once that kelp is gone. They don't have anything else left to hide behind. They don't have any food left. That is what they ate. A lot of the fish would lay their eggs in the very top part of the kelp forest where the kelp kind of all grew together. So they no longer have a safe place for their eggs. So that's why we're seeing all these fish disappear. And it might seem like now the urchins are doing great, but do you see a lot of food for them? No, so they've just eaten through all their food, and actually, even though there's a lot of these urchins, they're not very healthy. They're actually starving. So, because we lost that otter, we've seen how a kelp forest can completely degrade so that it's no longer a suitable home for the animals that used to live there. Well, this is what a lot of our kelp forests are looking like now. We have lost a lot of our otters down here in Southern California. So why do we think that might be? One thing to know about otters, I didn't mention it. Not only are they a keystone species, they are also an apex predator. And that means that there's no animal in this habitat that can eat it. So if no other animal is eating it, what do we think might have happened? So one thing that happened is basically otters were hunted for their fur. So otters, in the past when we had indigenous people living here, they would hunt otters for food, fur, but it wasn't on the scale as they were hunted once otters were targeted by the fur trade. So once that started, they were hunted really quickly, and eventually we got to a point where there was less than 100 otters here in Southern California. So that has had a huge effect on the health of our oceans here in Southern California because one of the main habitats we have all around here, those kelp forests, have degraded because of the lack of otters. Now, one thing that we are doing here at the aquarium is we are participating with Monterey Bay Aquarium in a otter surrogacy program. Basically, if we find otters, little baby otters that are out in their natural habitat that have been separated from their mom, we take them in. We have the otters that already live with us, teach them how to do all their big otter jobs, hunting, cleaning their fur, all the things they're going to need to know to be independent in their habitat. And then once they've grown up and they've learned those things, we put them back in their natural habitat. And like I said, we can only do this with a handful of otters at a time. But because otters are such a huge part of those habitats, they are keystone species, even just one otter is going to have a big impact in the overall health of that kelp forest. So that's why we're working on trying to protect otters. You are also doing your part here today by learning about the need for this help, learning about otters, learning about kelp forests, and how we can keep them healthy. So I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope you keep exploring, especially our local habitats here or wherever you live. And I hope you have a great day. Bye.